This week we are looking at a famous essay by William James, great American philosopher. And it's nice to talk about an American philosopher who once, The Will to Believe, one of the most famous documents of American philosophy. Quite a remarkable thing to read in itself. And one more step, I guess, the final step we'll take, as if there is no final step in philosophy. Philosophy's, if the if it's a dance, it's a endless marathon dance. Uh, we we don't. Well, I don't know. I mean, do we find truth? That would be the major question of philosophy, would it not? That is, philosophy is a vast thing, and philosophers talk about all sorts of things, and there's all sorts of fields and approaches, and philosophy talks about the world in all its different aspects. But one could make an argument that the fundamental question is, what is truth? Because it's the most wide-ranging question. It applies to everything that we say about everything, and um, I wouldn't make any kind of special claims for this course, but I think that by perhaps just a lucky accident in arranging the readings, we followed out maybe what is some introduction to what is the main question of all philosophy, and that is, what is truth, and can we get it? Of course, you can put it in any number of different ways. What is knowledge, and how do we know when we have it? Perhaps very, very similar questions to the question about truth. Looking this week at James, it's quite obvious that Hume is very important, and in different respects. In a very obvious way, Hume was conscious that he was part of a movement, a long-standing movement, even in his time, in English language philosophy, British philosophy, exclusively, that he called empiricism. And in a way, I think, looking at James, one is looking, or he is looking at the question to some degree, what does it mean to be an empiricist? Let's think back to Hume for a moment. To be an empiricist, I guess, in its essentials, is to believe that all of our knowledge comes from experience. But that is such a broad statement. We have to, of course, right away specify what is it that we actually experience. I mean, what are the boundaries of our experience? What is the nature of our experience? The other, perhaps, cornerstone of at least Hume's empiricism is what we experience are ideas in different forms, whether they come in the form of impressions, which are particularly lively and forceful ideas, or whether they come in other forms, memories and imagination, which are weaker. We experience our own ideas. So on the one hand, we only take into account those ideas that actually we can derive from some experience that we've had. And on the other hand, there's a big question about the truth of those ideas, given that they are mere ideas. And when we ask what is the relation of our ideas to anything external to us, to a world we take to be around us, not only the physical world of nature, but a larger world, a conceptual world, and a world that we have some notion contains things which cannot be experienced in the way that we experience physical objects. And I'm thinking particularly of our reading of St. Anselm, which might have seemed kind of out of place. But I thought that we should have an example of a non-empiricist, first of all, which Anselm is. That is, his argument does not rely upon our experience. It's often called an a priori argument. Anselm's argument for the existence of God, because it does not rely on experience. It relies on concepts that we have prior to, one would perhaps put it, to explain the a priori prior to experience. And that we can find truth that way, as we can find truth conceptually. And that really is two claims for us. First of all, you can find truth at all, which is something that was called into question by various authors. And secondly, you can find truth through logic and reason alone without reference to our sensory experience of what we take to be an external world. No doubt for Hume, as he says quite openly, that the Pyrrhonism is inescapable, at least in an intellectual way for him. That is, he's a skeptic. Intellectually, he's a skeptic. That is, I can have an idea of things in the world, and therefore when I talk about the things that I have ideas of, I am a good empiricist because I'm talking about things that I have experienced. Although he didn't put it exactly this way, I would say, I can have an idea of the world or things in the world, but I can't have an idea of my idea of my experience. That is, I have experience of things in the world, but I have no way of really, I have no experience of whether or not they're true in the sense that they could be some idea that could verify which of my ideas are actually true, in the sense that they match up with things in the world. That might have not have been completely clear, but we know that Hume ends with skepticism of a certain sort. And I say a certain sort because he, I guess, wouldn't consider himself to be a skeptic, a thoroughgoing skeptic, because he believes that the human nature is too strong for skepticism. The human predisposition to believe in truth, to believe in the truth of our ideas, to act on them, is too strong for a mere academic, intellectual skepticism. I don't think that William James is too far away from that position. I think that in a certain way, James is taking up that very thought, that there is something in human nature which predisposes us to believe in certain truths, and James, of course, is very ambitious in that respect. Thinking again of Anselm, it may be that James doesn't take the kind of argument that Anselm gives for the existence of God terribly seriously, because, of course, that argument was meant to be convincing. One might even say coercive in the sense in which James is using the term here and there, coercion. Anselm meant his argument to be convincing to any rational person, that is, anybody who could follow the argument in Anselm's mind would be convinced of it. Anybody who understood it would be convinced of it. That is, the assent of the intellect to the truth of the argument would be coercive in the sense that whether one wanted, willed, liked, or disliked, whether one wanted or willed the argument to be true or not, that if you were honest with yourself and thinking clearly, you would have to admit that it was true. James does not believe that. James does not believe that, first of all, that we decide on much of anything on that basis. That is, even the ordinary decisions of everyday life and even our common sense or our view of particulars of the universe around us are not decided on a purely intellectual basis. Can't be. And a big question like whether God exists, whether we live in a universe that is a God-created, God-filled universe or not, is not a question that will be decided by the kind of argument that Anselm gives, in James's opinion, but rather will be decided on other grounds. And those other grounds are very much like what Hume at least hinted at in his abstract to a treatise of human nature. They are passional grounds, which I think is a term both James and Hume that they share. I'm sure I'll find it in later talks, but I haven't found the coercion part. But one of the interesting things about James here is that in a way he's very Protestant, right? He doesn't have very good things to say about Catholics, which is an artifact of the time. Catholics were really, this is a Catholic university, and but in America, at the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century, it was still a Protestant world, and especially academically, if you weren't white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, you who had a very tough time making it as American academics, and that's pure prejudice that thankfully is being overcome, but it was just simply, so some of the things James says are not really that nice in that respect. But in any case, well, there's a rejection of sort of papism and also of medieval philosophy, Anselm's way of doing philosophy, in favor of a more empirical philosophy that is, of course, part and parcel of both Descartes and Hume and many, many others. But the thing is filled with Latin phrases, and it's good to look them up. And now that we have the internet, we just need to Google them to find out what they mean. But he has one on page 24, ad extorquendum essensum meum, which I Googled it, which means to compel my assent. That is, Anselm thought that the conclusion of his argument would compel the assent of anyone, and James doesn't think so, especially when it comes to religious matters, something to do with God. Our assent, that is, our accepting of a principle, let's say that God exists, or God doesn't exist, is not realistically going to happen because we are compelled by the truth. We are compelled by the facts, and we simply have to look them squarely in the face to accept them. That's not the way that decision and belief work. And that is a big question here, belief. I mean, this is an essay called The Will to Believe, and was it not Hume's major point, at least in terms of how he described it, is this new and surprising discovery about the grounds upon which we believe things or don't. What else does it mean to be an empiricist? Well, of course, it means to be committed to that all ideas come from experience, and that all we really have are our ideas. But that's really not true, is it? We have other things in our nature, too, which Hume was very interested in exploring and certainly did explore, and that means we have feeling and emotion as well. And Hume's great discovery, I guess, in terms of what he says in the abstract, is that the grounds for belief in the truth of an idea are not other ideas. One of the things that he showed is that if we say, why do we believe in the truth of an idea, it's not because we have another idea that tells us that it's true. That would be incoherent. That would be impossible. And if you want to see my take on that, just look at the Hume video that I did on that particular subject, talk about that particular subject. No, the grounds for belief are passional. They have to do with feeling or sentiment. We don't believe an idea is truth because we have another idea that tells us that it's true. We believe that an idea is true because we have a strong feeling attached to it. So the ultimate grounds for belief are not intellectual, at least in some cases. Perhaps not in all cases, but in many cases. Certainly in the case of things like cause and effect, I hope to be, but certainly in cases of things like belief in the existence of God or anything that's truly metaphysical. Does God exist? Do human beings have free will? Those kind of classic metaphysical questions, but it's questions which transcend the boundaries of our ordinary experience and then become problematic in terms of how we decide them. Well, this notion that it's feeling or sentiment that is the grounds for our belief is something that James is taking up, and one could see in a certain way James is just putting a twist on something that Hume has already said. Of course, this whole attitude, one may go back to Sextus Empiricus, and the differences between a thinker like Sextus, a true skeptic, and a thinkers like Hume and James, who go pretty far in terms of skepticism, is really kind of the attitude, one might say the moral attitude one takes, excuse me, towards skepticism. Sextus believed that it was quite possible to live in a state of mental suspense, to suspend one's judgments about things that one did not have valid intellectual evidence for. Hume, and certainly James makes this much more thematic, believed that there was a different attitude that could be taken, and that moreover, at least from James's point of view, it could be justified as being valid not only in a practical way, but perhaps in a deeper way too. So let's take a look at the details of William James's A Will to Believe.